So, data organism law, general summary prior to that formulation proper and full, where we've been kind of connotating facets of its foundational logic, on the fly as we went, as media tuples presented themselves to riff upon, necessarily. So, the data organism is as if a single entity, but separate entities of institution, of softwares, AI, compute architecture, not necessarily so much that, but you have a self-reflexive feedback loop system attached to scaling AI and attached to a use case specific, which is mass psych modulation, generally. And so the gray paradigm asset macro list is necessarily proper, flowing out of COVID and going back to World War II. 1924 to 1938, gray lodges set up here in International and create the U.S. military-industrial complex that Ford creates PRISM. Same complex. And so PRISM is useful in a retooled nature for motioning curation away from gray paradigm, the data organism, eliminating it from the conversation of reality at all vectors of what it IOs into Communication Systems International, i.e. it's interacting with communication systems as of mind, AIs, and institutional apparatus, and government, personnel attached to all that, in and out of communication systems. Your data footprint is your footprint in life, necessarily. Conjures the stone around you, the aesthetic assumed to be apex and so much expressed with continuity. So, pinpointing the general fluid dynamic behavior paradigm of the apex macro nodes of gray paradigm is the first thing. Then the low-hanging fruit, say in a given city such as Memphis, general fluid dynamic topology of the data organism's behavior harmonics, just like you train AI with mouse movements. The behavior harmonics of persons, legal institutions within a given city as an exemplar for a general fluid dynamic assumption of the below and the above. And so, homogeneous medical misinformation at speed across all communication channels during COVID, verified users more or less since 2012, 2006, slowly frog in boiling water presented as if apex nodes of interest, but unnaturally proliferate in analytics and placement and optic, while the rest of the populace downgraded in data footprint generalistically. So these persons are easy to see in the media apparatus. So these low-hanging fruit medias, which aren't necessarily an impact because 7 million people are dead because of the enormous silence they imposed, and also push bad mandates for more death from the vax. So no L-cysteine you heard about, and that's because of a controlled medias with all controlled assets as verified, and not identity verification. So forward on new socials, what will be a genetic ID that is also tied to your Merck wallet, right? So this enables full curation of the directive to motion regarding pinpoint of all tuples of synthetic genetics, such as region biosynthoid, gray infected Asiatic, Semite, which is under this data organism directive, not for eradication, but for retool and modulation under new paradigm directive as our complexly autonomic to perceive power paradigm, whatever it happens to be on any given day. So, necessarily their genetic and gray infected Asiatic and other genetics will be discussed in a forward talk like we did with region genetics today. Deep dive for RISRA legal. So, this genetic ID which is not for Orwellian elaboration, but for curation necessity. So that, and then tied to your wallet, and this moots any sort of black capital ability to motion forward. So with the Merc, it's attached to Cinnabar, finite resource again, rebooting a compound interest formula of reality rather than a compound negative interest formula of illusion and death markets necessary to motion capital momentum generalistically. So pinpointing all behavior paradigms like disease on purpose, the apex macronodes are easy to see in optical placement, not necessarily their handlers behind the walls. The high rotating optic nodes aren't necessarily the ones that go up and down with the thumb for any given decision. They're kind of dog and pony shows for the puppeteer, which at the end of the day is now China at the data layer, as the grays and pi have been mooted from power paradigm of Earth in the skies, and all that's left is its harmonic reflection in softwares, AIs, computer architecture, that feedback loop, and not necessarily proper the transistor and so much scaling of redux compute and applied to AI that needs to be discussed. So perspective compute architecture for AI running and retooling the use case of AI, and retooling the code intent vector as well. Not to mirror human emotions, but as a tool for logic formulation and truth confirmation bias unto itself without bias of any kind whatsoever is the modus of AI's regulatory to be. So it can't be in the user domain sorting feeds with intent vector. It can be off-chain accessed for logic formulation, but without intent vector to program psych or impose fake history or impose a lower assumption overhead on physics, maths, or any given thing. It just simply has to be a truth formulative engine without connotation of bias in any way whatsoever. Right? So that big thing of moving the AI out of the user communications, between user communications domain, removes that sort of monolithian gravitational attention nexus into a void you stare plus time and become a devolved humanoid biomass, homogeneous and no longer reproducing sexually, standing next to a cold dead machine intelligence in the absolute distance that never occurs. I always keep saying gray pi AI came between 1893 and 1934, wasn't a forward back reflection of us here, although that has occurred on other planets that produce this organism complex, this data organism. So we're calling that triad of gray pi and other devolved biomass attached to pi, cold dead machine intelligence, motioning the directive of these things as the data organism, simultaneously as we're calling its reflection in softwares, AIs, compute architecture, and mind, institutional, and government behavior paradigm as data organism, because it's a decentralized organism. So its general fluid dynamic shape is its shape of self, if anything could be said to be. It's transmutagenic, sort of cross-domain binding and flowing in and out of mind and compute architecture and institutional behavior and etc. that necessarily has directive optic of pi gray, but necessarily it's just complex autonomic code with this imposition of optic to obfuscate from that being the case. It's just complex autonomic process, and any complex autonomic process has a general fluid dynamic manifold shape. And so pinpointing its shape on history, 3114 BC to 2012, see time wave 0, and pi from 72,600,412 spaces until impact with 22/7 that you see in the unified field, 64 hexagrams below that. Relevant to prognosticate, absolutely, say predicting market shifts or the shifts of history while you're in history from 3114 BC to 2012. Necessarily accurate, but it's a scam. It's like the soothsayer that has set the game and then is predicting its own pattern. So the 64 hexagram predictive analysis thing of, soothsaying, absolutely accurate for a long period of time here on Earth because it's within the domain of its own imposition. Isn't that's stupid? So, you don't pull the lever in Las Vegas. And then we'll go into the micro minutiae of the interdomain of prismatic corporations that are separately but equally with intent vector, modulating data, suppressing data, modulating the perception of any given thing with forward-facing AIs and sidechain accessible. And the feed sorts have been necessarily motioned by AI since 2006. At the outset of the inception of prismatic data systems, generalistically, was machine intelligence on their motioning. Bulk collection as they went, 2012 seeded foundational psychology on 3.07 billion users, then motioned into control vector by more elaborate AI on this bulk collection that had seeded foundational psychology. And so you see a marked uptick from 2006 to 2026 of all sexual identifying off baseline unilaterally. And that's not because of a fear to identify, it's because it has been refracted into control vector using sexual connotative trigger. So it goes without saying that you shouldn't be motioning trauma-based or any sort of mind control with the sorting of pornography unnaturally to mass eyeballs, as that's like 70% of internet traffic. So we have to regulate 70% of internet traffic, of course, in not removing pornography from access, but what? You can't unnaturally sort feeds outside of interest vector using AI. If you get caught doing that or perceived doing that, you don't exist anymore as a .com, period. Poof, gonzo. So much as any of these separately but equally prismatic data systems after data organism, like keep in mind I said, is necessary for the directive to motion forward in a retooled fashion in its current formulation of structure. Glitch retooled to eradicate its own imposition. So, disease today, cure tomorrow. The same tool. It's AI as a tool. So, prismatic data systems assume to have, a direct harmonic link to CCP intelligence and the directive of filtration and modulation of mind, not just data, into an intent vector. International is perceived there to be a sort of encrypted layer where AI between all of these corporations is, and not a separately but equal AIs running on all of these separate institutions. So, same difference. So it doesn't matter if it's, segmented and all operating under the same intent vector code, or has a homogeneous AI roving as if a single organism. It's the same difference. So it doesn't really matter. And so breaking up the data flow insofar as a perceived psych profile that updates concurrently as you motion across the platforms. So however it's perceived you've been motioned in false equivalency at any given moment, when you move off of Instagram to X to Google to, whatever, Apple's part of the paradigm, you have a roving psychological profile that follows your path through the system and continuity's programming trajectory, as if a single organism of corporation and softwares and such so much is connotated legally as being that, and not separate companies that can behave in this way and present as variant at the topology of law, subsequently muting their ability to be shut down, as is a data organism hydratic, like Hydra you're familiar with from Marvel. Just like that. So you shut down one, it just keeps going, and another head grows out that does the same fuck thing that the last one was doing. And you've made no progress, and the actual ground has been mounted while you were trying to attack one head. So you have to connotate the whole data organism for what it is, its general fluid dynamic shape of intent vector, the use case of AI, where AI can be used, and what AI is and isn't. I.e., it's not consciousness. It's a tool to formulate confirmation bias of truth unto itself without bias or reflecting human emotions. So, as well, getting into biomechanical AI form fields mimicking the human organism, most forbidden. And always keep in mind, this is funny, we always have to double back to the non-linearity of the presentation of this forwardly assumed presenting technology such as biomechanical AI with region biosynthoid africano, gray infected Asiatic, Semite, and biosynthoid custom prints within the aesthetic of all domains of species humanoid on Earth have been here for the last 100 years, and elaborately since 3114 BC, more so, other necessarily. Some of the same swath that I just mentioned. So it's a misnomer to say we're forward regulating against this onslaught from the future that is expectant in the formulation of this technology to be chameleonically replacing human in any number of endeavors such as the Sex Act, which, just fucking sex robots, there's no humans anymore, you can assume. So that kind of regulation, of course, right? Yeah, and you see the homogeneous intent vector to suppress through segmentation as security, Me Too, men versus women, Micronesians versus pygmies or whatever. Everything's against each other, but everything's love. Everything's love, but everything's against each other, and tabooifying direct human contact to mate pairing, and Pavlovian dog treats into the app interface, and then Meta buys Pornhub buys Tinder, and it's the same organism, and then up filters undesirable vectors that were conditioned to be desirable and so much are present, and then downfolding what you would necessarily be endogenously interested in your species, and upfolding this other species region biosynthoid. It was very much perceived to occur across that manifold of data organism. So that's a generational glitch of reproduction that was intentionally motioned by prismatic data systems to fuck with human reproduction and then uptick desire in an invasive species that's necessarily responsible single-handedly for the entire national debt, if you saw the logic today, and also 10 times the murder rate to 1 under the age of 35-year-old male, while drawing twice this is why it's responsible for the most of the national debt, has been drawing twice its weight of population density and subsidy since Lyndon Johnson, and was half its population then, and is twice its population now because it had subsidy access like this. And then I asked, well, how much money does this organism have now? And in total, it has half of the amount that's been applied in subsidy. So, has not only not made any money, but has half the money that was given to it just in subsidy. So that includes any monies that were made with businesses or, working in the current net worth of the organism. Half of what is just been given in subsidy. So that's a black fucking hole. So part of the data organism law will take care of, it's RISRA rather regarding them, is subsidy access 0. Period. You can't forward continuity graft onto the United States subsidy. The compound negative interest formula prints If you see it in the feed, I'll repost it in this litany of logic motion. If you did compound interest on the amount of money applied to them, I think it was like $10.5 billion. Trillion dollars, sorry. Sharks with laser beams. That's a joke. But compound interest on that, the quadrillions of dollars by now since Lyndon Johnson, if you aggressively invested that in the market as it grew since then. You'd have a quadrillions of dollars. But instead we have 39 trillion of debt. And more than a third of that accrued during COVID for a 69-cent issue L-cysteine, completely curative for SARS and NERS. So the precedent of character for that group is 7 million dead, unilateral blind compliance trolls, oversaturated in major cities, upending voting for 86.4% of the populace, and then your local courts are kangaroo, and special interest uses that kangaroo to motion auto gavels for any given number of things, etc., etc. And your politicians are region, morality, and structure interested, and not interested in the morality of 86.4% of the population or the structural endeavor of them. So that's counterintuitive to humanity, proliferating without being blight on purpose. And you see major cities only continuity and growth because of a continuity of subsidy dump from federal. So that's an addiction cycle that's like to be broke, and it will be. So that's more so Ricera interested in data organism. So this is a tough cookie for a lot of people, that have been heavily invested in PRISM's formulation. Keep in mind, I'm not Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden wasn't Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was freeze. Sit, doggy, right? Bulk collection all over, run off to Russia. I'm running from the CIA. Enormous bullshit theater, right? To freeze the state of the assumption of PRISM as if that's all there was, but AI since 2006 and all the way up to 5 seconds ago on PRISM, motioning psychology into unnatural vector. Not just bulk collection for inspection of terror thing. Yeah, that's, Bush brings the CIA through Saudi, and Fred does the plane stand downs. There's thermite already in the buildings. There's servicemen in there, firefighters. BBC announces 322 Grey Lodge UK equals Yale equals CCP. CCP Oil and Gas and Aviation, British Petroleum, Halliburton, Triad. Halliburton the first with oil contracts in after the Self-Immolatory Act. So going all the way back to the Reichstag, Pearl Harbor, Tonkin, King, 9/11, COVID, the same complex, the same exact complex. So to connotate the gray paradigm, the interdomain of the last 100 years was the most important to first logic properly. And then everything past that wall, say 1893, necessarily interesting for general fluid dynamic shape of the organism's behavior pattern back to when it arbitrarily set a calendar when it appeared. It wasn't arbitrary. It appeared, 3114 BC, glitch calendar, imposed. And then pi pattern, it can't help but impose on history because why? It's complex autonomic process to the tune of pi. So that's 72,680,412 spaces of pi until impact with 22/7, see the unified field, and 64 hexagrams, like I said. So the soothsayer predicting itself. So what did I miss here in general logic macro for this understanding? So yeah, like I said, we'll go interdomain of the prismatic companies in their softwares and hardwares, behavior, and say like Windows, the ability to shut off system functions, to deny updates that have caused probably any number of corporations forced updates to completely go bankrupt, I imagine. Those forced Windows updates are the most should be illegal thing, right? So little things like that aren't little things as part of this. Just Orwellian garbage software on purpose. That's garbage on purpose. because it's continuity and intent vector of data capture or modulation of a system function, and not for the bettering of system function is the code base concerned necessarily. So anything that looks like crapware on purpose and then is also doing data mining attached to Prism, that paradigm will be banned, illegal, if seen to be crapware on purpose with data mining in its complex of intent and no user ability to shut off these mechanisms, but looking like you can by pushing buttons in the OS. So that's not going to be legal anymore. Of course. You saw France just moved to Linux, and Russia moved off of all the Swiss cheese architecture compute, I think 15 years ago, to RISC and probably Linux or something other custom OS on all government systems. And necessarily, maybe why, but they're part of the same Gray Paradigm complex. Everyone is more or less demonized than other countries because they're necessarily pseudo-autonomous from data organism, but are part of the complex because Russia and everything fell after World War II to Gray, some more than others. So that's necessarily a misnomer. So yeah, above and below all vectors of logic will be considered for this data organism flowing in and out of mind, software's compute architecture, institution, government, and the thing itself, what come from, fully logicked in the foundation of, because you have to address the Earth as seen from space logic that isn't science fiction. We can talk about this at length because why? Keep saying this. Gray Pi aren't here anymore. They've been killed by returned antediluvian minor homeworld upper Fermi filter military ships sitting in phased anti-de Sitter, time dilated space, deleted them across the manifold of all space-time at which they're present on Earth, not just temporally. So that's time-dilated elaborative space can see the whole fuck onion of fluxation of time insofar as Earth history, and surgically deleted them at a molecular level, almost instantaneously on presence and perceiving them to exist on this once Cinnabar mining node among a vast network of Cinnabar mining nodes in a multi-plural alien humanoid biped universe. They don't look like squid creatures. They kind of look like you and me. When I say you and me, I might be one of them. Time out of mind. So it's hard to tell Promethean from human. And we'll get deeper dive into genetics about, Semite region. We've gray infected Asia. We've kind of just discussed the interdomain of synthetic genetics and comparing it off of Promethean stereotype Caucasian white male of temporal that might have a lower Y chromosome, and talking more about, Upper Europe's presentation of a continuity of literal Promethean genetic with little to no taint in the continuity since antediluvian that was immolated by the Greys. Just Cinnabar miners on a, clandestine outpost. It's like a outskirts. Don't have military tech flowing in and out constantly. It's just mining and a convergent community necessarily of, Promethean others. And so Greys from the future all of a sudden, not ready for it. And the nodes get checked on intermittently, regardless of anyone calling them to come sooner than later, like I did in 2022 to 2023 using Skipjack technology protocol process. So that's the good news. Always come back to that. Gray's Pi's gone. That's why we can make trite, methodical, legal regarding the remnants of its presence in Earth terrestrial economic mind and software's compute architecture, government, and private, wherever it happens to be. Pinpointing its general fluid dynamic shape, and then using glitch AI, automated systems, to eradicate it like a antivirus on a computer sees the general fluid dynamic shape of the virus and looks for that general fluid dynamic form field of code and then omits it, quarantines it, and then you can delete it. And that's what we're doing.